I can still remember the shock I felt in seminary when one day one of the professors said that he was going to preach on the second coming. And we all were interested because of all the controversy there. And he said, "I'm not sure if I'm for it or against it." We were all appalled. How could anybody be against the second coming? And then he went on to say, for those of us who know the Lord, it's the greatest event that's ever going to happen. But for those of us who don't know the Lord, it's the worst event that could possibly happen. And his point was, God, give me a little more time to do what you've called me to do about sharing who you are with family and friends and neighbors and loved ones. And that was a point well taken. Point well taken. I can remember in Houston, I grew up in Houston, I can remember seeing the thunderstorms come and the sky looked so funny when I was a young person. And I can remember thinking to myself, the Lord is coming back. This is the second coming. I just know it is. And I can remember being terrified about that happening. I want to share with you a message this morning that I think has the potential to change your life. I think it has the potential to help you look at God in a brand new way. I'm really going to try to deliver this sermon as best I can without getting too emotional, but if I do, you just pray for me. Is that a deal? I have really struggled. My walk with God has not been an easy walk. It has been an up and down. It has been a lot of misunderstanding mixed with a lot of truth. And I can remember as a young person really being afraid of God, because I felt like that he had this list of rules and he was checking off the ones that I had broken. And that if I died, I'd have to stand before him and he would confront me with all of these things that I had done. I guess I viewed God as the hanging judge of the universe. I really did. Some kind of super Vince Lombardo, And my Christianity was absolutely miserable. Miserable. And God used an Old Testament book to help me understand who He is. I want to preach out of several chapters in that book in kind of an overview fashion today. It's the book of Hosea. Turn to the part of your Bible that has the gold leaves not broken, and Hosea is in that part. I think God says to us, we believe that God is holy and other and different and transcendent, and we're finite and sinful, time-bound. How does God communicate to us? How does He reveal Himself to us? How does He accommodate our kind of fallen mindset to truly reveal something true about Him? Now, I don't believe we have exhaustive knowledge about God. I do believe we have true knowledge about God. And one of the ways that God has chosen to reveal Himself is through analogies. He comes into my life and He picks something that I understand, that all human beings understand, and He says to me, "Bob, I'm like this." Now, this is what's happening in the book of Hosea. In Hosea chapter 1, God calls this young prophet, and He says to this young prophet, "I want you to marry." Now, the translations differ here. You probably have a woman of whoredom, something like that. You can imagine the shock and surprise as this young prophet said, "You want me to do what?" Now, I do not think this lady was a cultic prostitute. I do believe that she was caught up in the worship practices of Israel of the 8th century. And as we know from the book of Hosea, they had taken the fertility practices of Baal and Asherah, the Canaanite fertility gods, and they just put Yahweh's name on them. So they were worshiping the Canaanite gods in Yahweh's name. Hosea goes so far as to say, "On every high hill and under every green tree daughters and daughters-in-law and fathers and brothers and uncles play the harlot. Can you imagine what that must have been like? I think this woman was caught up in that kind of cultic fertility worship. And here God tells this young preacher to marry a lady like that. Her name is Gomer. They have several children in chapter 1. We don't even know if these are really his children or not. Every one of these children have prophetic names. Look at verse 4, Jezreel. Look at verse 6, Lo Ruhamah. Look at verse 9, Lo Ami. These are all names about how God was going to break the covenant with his people. You are not my people. I have no compassion on you. That's the play on these words. Things had got so bad that finally Gomer left. First thing I want to say to you about this before I finish this story in chapter 2 and 3 is, do you remember the first person you were in love with? Maybe it was in high school or junior high. Do you remember the first person? I can remember this person so well in my life. They may call this puppy love, but I want you to know it'll kill a puppy dead in its tracks. But I can remember going over to this girl's house after school, staying until her mother ran me off, getting on the phone and talking till 2 or 3 in the morning when I had to get up for school the next morning, willing to do anything for this person, wanted to talk to her, wanted to be with her. I can remember going home at night and my stomach hurting for being away from this girl. Do you have that kind of intensity somewhere in your past towards someone? God said to me, Bob, not audibly, I don't get those. You're afraid of me. You're afraid I'm mad at you. You're afraid if you don't perform perfectly that I'm going to reject you. Bob, I care for you like you care for Linda. Bingo! Now, I knew in my heart how I felt about this young girl in high school. There's no doubt I would do anything for her. And suddenly God comes to me in the midst of that kind of terribly heated, passionate, committed love and says, Bob, that's the way I love you. If I could be so crude to put it this way, I even think that God's love is so strong for us that I think God's stomach hurts when we go away from Him. He said, Bob, you don't know my life. You don't know what I've done, what poor choices I've made. You don't know the love of God, my friend. It's a love that will not let you go. It's a love in the midst of all of your faults, He still loves you and cares for you. This prophet loved this woman. I understand what that's like. You mean that you can describe God as a young, passionate, faithful lover, and that somehow is an appropriate analogy to describe who God is in our lives? Yes. As a matter of fact, the metaphors of the Bible about marriage and God are common. Did you know the wilderness wandering period for Israel, even though that was a judgment period for their unbelief, as the Jews look back on the Exodus and the wilderness wandering, they call that the honeymoon between Yahweh and Israel. God was never so close as during that time. It's not by accident that in Ephesians chapter 5, when Paul is trying to somehow communicate to us the intimacy and beauty between Jesus and the church, and that the Scriptures call Jesus the bridegroom and the church the bride. Human beings understand something of the emotions and passions and depths of feeling that has to do with sexual love. And the Bible doesn't think that's inappropriate to say that kind of intensity, that kind of commitment characterizes the love between God and His people. I think that shocks us. I think that takes us back a bit. And yet, that is so true. This woman had got so involved, apparently, was so unfaithful to Hosea, that she is sold into slavery, apparently as a cultic prostitute. And God comes to the prophet in the midst of his grief, and he says to this prophet, I want you to buy Gomer back. I want you to take her home. I want you to wait a while, and I want you to love her again. You can almost hear this preacher say, you want me to do what? God, I was faithful to that lady. I did everything for that lady. I was with her. I was for her. She kept going away to other men. She kept going away to other men. God, she has left her family, and now she is being sold as a slave, and you want me to do what? I want you to buy her back, and I want you to love her again. And when you look at the price he had to pay in chapter 3 for her, you'll see that it took everything this young man had. He gives part money and part food, which means he's emptying the food cabinet to buy back his unfaithful wife. Now, why would God do that? Why would God set up that kind of scenario for this young man? Because it's an analogy for us. I hope that you have never experienced the pain of sexual infidelity. I hope you never experienced the terrible trauma of the breaking up of a home, of divorce, be it by death or by divorce. There is few human emotions that can describe the pain, the sense of loss, the sense of emptiness, the sense of being kicked right in the stomach that kind of experience can bring. And yet God says, I don't think you understand yet how much I love you. So I'm going to take this one marriage between faithful Hosea and unfaithful Gomer. Unfaithful, 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 unfaithful Gomer. And I'm going to use this as an analogy to say to you, whatever you've done, however far you've gone, however much you've run for me, however much you've sinned, however much you've spit in my direction, I love you, and I will not let you go. Oh, you can sense the terrible trauma in this home. You know, I teach Old Testament at the university. As I look at the Old Testament, we see the faithfulness of God as He called Abraham, as He called Israel out of Egypt. We see the mercy, the undeserved, unmerited love of God, and we see the absolute unfaithfulness of Israel. She never was able to keep the covenant. She always went after other gods. She always broke the covenant. She always did what God told her not to do. And suddenly it dawned on me, why am I afraid of a God that will not let me go? A God that would not let the Jews go when they were a stubborn and stiff-necked and rebellious people. And the analogy is of an unfaithful wife, and yet the prophet is told to buy her back with sacrificial cost and love her again. Oh, I could preach on David, and hopefully I will soon, when all of the major sins in the life of King David, and yet God calls him a man after my own heart. There is something in Baptist life of legalism. We are a rule-oriented people. And I have found that rule-oriented Christians are absolutely miserable. I think I grew up really believing that the more things I don't do, the closer I am to God. You ever feel that way? That is so wrong, so inappropriate, so out of place. Yes, there are guidelines for the Christian life. Yes, there are biblical do's and don'ts, but all of them flow out of a sense of acceptance, never out of a flow of earning or meriting or deserving the grace of God. We live out of an absolute, undeserved gratitude on our part. We certainly follow after Christ, but we do it out of love, never out of, I do more than you do. I'm better than you are. I don't do this, this, and this, and so I'm more spiritual. No, you're more legalistic, and probably you're more miserable. Reason most of us don't do evangelism is nobody wants the misery we have in Jesus. If we were a little more happy and free and joyful, few more folks would buy into it. Oh, those people don't dance. Well, we better get some dancing shoes ready. You read the Old Testament? Resurrection Day, we're going to tiptoe around the tulip all over the place. I get, Baptists amaze me. They say, well, Bob, Bob, now Bob. You know that dancing will get those people sexually excited. I got news for you. The kids at my school wake up, breathe one breath, they're sexually excited. Has nothing to do with dancing, I guarantee you. See, our problem is we think if we just draw a fence around everything and say, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, then they'll grow up happy. We need to teach them how to handle sexuality, not try to build a fence around it. Don't hold hands and you'll never have a baby. Oh, yuck. I think he fell off a truck. I get real tickled. We say, now we're going to go to a camp this week. At camp, you can't hold hands, you can't wear shorts, and you can't swim in the same swimming pool. So we put 50 kids in a bus that holds 30. We drive them overnight to a camp where they can't touch. What has happened to us? Chapter 11. Hosea chapter 11. The next metaphor is another analogy, another powerful analogy. As 1 through 3 is the analogy of God as a young, passionate, faithful lover. This analogy is God as a loving parent. When Israel was a youth, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Although this verse is quoted in the Gospels as referring to Jesus going down to Egypt, in context here it refers to the Exodus, of course. The more they called them, the more they went from them. This is referring to the prophets. It's amazing to me how it's like we're spiritual teenagers. The prophet spoke to people of Israel, and Israel did just the opposite. Exactly what the prophet said don't do, Israel did. And God says, they kept sacrificing to Baals. They kept burning incense to idols. He was saying, I loved them. I brought them out of Egypt. I did everything for them. And they're giving credit to a false god. I gave them rain and crops, and they're thanking Baal for it. Yet it was I who taught Ephraim to walk. Now here is God as a loving parent. And I remember when my children were little, I was so proud of our first baby. I was still in college. And, we would teach her to walk by holding on to our little fingers and walking between our legs. You know what I'm talking about? You do like this, walk around. Now, folks, this will give you a groin pull. We'd walk with that little girl. It was so much fun to go to malls. I always enjoy malls where they have Baskin-Robbins ice cream places. Anyway, just go to a mall, and we would walk around, watch parents and grandparents walk their little kids around. Oh, it's a wonderful time. God says, I taught Ephraim to walk. I took them in my arms, but they did not know that I healed them. I led them with cords of a man, with the bonds of love. Now, this is the word for child training leash. I grew up in Houston, and when I was little, my mother would take us downtown Houston. I don't know exactly what we went downtown for, but if you've ever been in downtown Houston, there's these big, wide sidewalks, and then just the curbs right there, they got these huge drainage holes for water, and the buses go right there. So my mother put this dog leash on me, the kind that go around your neck and around your shoulders. I know. And so when we got home, we didn't have a fence. So she said, Bob, I just hooked you on the clothesline. So I could go 6 feet this way, 6 feet this way, and 20 feet. I said, Mother, did you put a water dish out there too? I don't think that really affected me, but you know, I look back and I think, my mother put me on a leash. But of course, the trick was, what was that leash for? It was for my protection. Now, it may have looked funny, it may have cramped my style a little bit, but it really was an act of love. I'm amazed at what Christians think about God. Something happens to us negative, we say, oh, God's mad. God's after me. You know, it took years in my life for me to understand how God works with us. And I really didn't understand. I didn't grow up with a father in my home, so I didn't know parents really. And it wasn't until I became a parent that I began to understand what this is all about. Our first little girl, we bought her a green machine. You know what that is? Remember those big wheels? She would ride down our driveway and across the street and up in the next driveway. And the only problem was we lived on a busy street heading toward the mall. And so I tried to explain to Michelle, little girl, big car. Whoosh, whoosh. No. They can't see you, Michelle. You can't ride in the street. No. Michelle, if you ride in the street, your daddy's going to spank you. That solved it, didn't it? No. So I took my belt off and spanked her. Peggy's saying all the time right behind me, you're going to put bruise, you're going to hurt, she's going to have it for life. Yeah, you're right. Because you see, the truth of the matter is, I was ready for my daughter to be angry with me than dead. I'd rather her not even understand why I'm doing it that way. It didn't matter if she understood. It just mattered she wasn't dead. So I hurt her so that she wouldn't do it again. And she knew if she'd do it again, I was going to spank her again. And so for a while, she's mad, won't talk, won't sit in my lap. That doesn't matter. I'm not going to let her die out there where she doesn't understand. Bingo. God, I thought you were mad at me. God, I thought I had said something, done something, didn't tithe enough, went somewhere, and all of this was your anger. It wasn't his anger at all. It was his love. What are you saying to me, Bob? There are areas that you cannot go in. They'll destroy you, Bob. You can't function. This will kill you. Bob, you can't go that way. I took it as God as a mean person that wanted no one to have fun. If it's fun, God's against it. He's against everything. He just won't let me. No. My kids think I fell off a truck. I mean, they think I'm really dumb. They stay up too late, and then suddenly they had this terrible stomach ache the next morning in time to go to school. You know what I'm talking about? Oh, Dad, Dad, sick. What? So our new answer is, are you really sick? Yes. We'll call the doctor. Now, when my kids hear doctor, they see needles this long that they put into their eyeballs and tongues and instantaneous cure. I'm feeling better, Dad. Yes, sir, I'll go to school. Don't you call that doctor. Now, the trick is, if my kids are sick, if they get cut or they're hurt or they need a vaccination, I'm taking them to the doctor. Now, they're going to beg and make deals. I'll never mess up a room again. I'll never do this. They're going to the doctor. Because I know a few moments of pain have no comparison to a life of happiness. God is going to do what's best for you with you kicking and screaming and misunderstanding and impugning his motives and thinking, oh, God doesn't care. God's going to do what's best for you. Hallelujah? Amen. It took me forever to understand that. Forever. Look at verse 4. I led them with the cords of a man, with the bonds of love. I became to them as one who lifts the yoke from their jaws. This is weird. Now, this is the only place I do this in the Old Testament, but I want to show you what I think has been a mistranslation here is what I think. We've been talking about God as parent from verse 1. Suddenly, in the middle of verse 4, which starts out with God as a father, in the middle of verse 4, it turns to God as a keeper of an oxen. Now, I think that's not good. Context will tell you that does not fit in. There's no place in here where God is the keeper of oxen. Throughout this, it's God as a loving parent. Now, look at your Bibles. The word for yoke and the word for infant in Hebrew are only different by one double consonant. And the word is exactly the same, except there's a double letter. Now, you see how a transcribal error could be made easily with that. So look what happens if you change the word yoke to infant. Then the last part of verse 4 becomes, I became as one who lifts the infant to my cheek, bent down and fed them. Well, this turns God into a metaphor of a nursing mother. Now, I know some of you are offended by God as a mother, so I want to take a minute on that. One year in Lubbock, I preached on Mother's Day on the femininity of God, and the offering fell. Baptists were just not ready for the femininity of God. I'm not sure you're ready, but I want to talk about it a minute. I hear people say we need to change all the words in the Bible from he to she, or he to the person or something. Yuck. Now let's do a little theology here. Number one, God is not a man. Do you know that? And God is not a woman. God is an eternal spirit. He has no body. He made men and He made women, and He incorporates the best of both in Himself, but He is neither one. The reason we call God He is because the Bible came out of a patriarchal culture. But even in the Bible, I want to show you a couple of places where God is described as feminine. The first one is Genesis chapter 1. Might surprise you. Look there with me quickly. Genesis chapter 1, where it says there, and the Spirit, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Verse 2. And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was, now my New American Standard says, moving over the surface of the waters. But if you have another translation or a marginal note, it should say brooding. The Spirit was brooding over the waters. Now, roosters do a lot of wonderful things, but they don't brood. Hens brood. Brooding is the idea of gathering little chickens under your wings or into your breast feathers when danger comes or cold comes or night comes. Hens brood. You mean the Spirit of God is described in a feminine bird word? Yes. And then in Exodus 19, about verse 4, where it says, see how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Again, father eagles do a lot of great things. They stand on flagpoles a lot and stuff like that. But they don't teach the little ones how to fly. It's the mother eagle that pushes the babies out of the nest. It's the mother eagle that, if they have trouble, swoops underneath them and catches them on her pinions and soars them back to the nest. It's the mother eagle that's brought them on eagle's wings. There's several of the passages. One I think is in Isaiah. I believe it's 49, but I forget the chapter, where it says, though a nursing mother may desert her own child, that's been heard of, I will never desert you, O Israel. I can remember, I'm a deer hunter. I love to hunt. I was up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming one year hunting elk is what I was doing. And the guy from the church in Lubbock with me, we ran across a female moose and a baby. And he said, Bob, just stand still and back up real slow. And I wonder what all the hassle was for. It'll run off in a minute, I thought. He said, you know, moose are really strange animals. They're so protective of their babies that up here in Wyoming and Montana, moose mothers have been known to butt trains if they think their baby's in danger. But a train. There is nothing more protective, more tender, more warm, more compassionate than a nursing mother. And God says to us, I love you like a nursing mother. Jesus used a feminine word even for himself when he said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets, how I would have gathered you together as a hen does her chicks, but you would not. All the human emotions of parenthood, both male and female, are the analogy that God says to you. Do you understand what it's like to be a parent? Do you understand all the emotions and tensions and fears and joys caught up in being a parent? God says, I love you. I love you like that. And look at verse 8. Picture the heart of God now. How can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I surrender you, O Israel? Drop down 2 lines. My heart is turned over within me. All my compassions are kindled. I will not execute my fierce anger. I will not destroy Ephraim again, for I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst. Now this has changed my worldview. I just am asking the Lord to help me communicate it to you. There was a time in my life when I was scared to death of God, a time when I was afraid. Did I say the right thing? Did I join the right group? Have I done enough? On and on, these questions just haunted me about this religious aspect of my life. I was so worried about God being a nitpicker and somehow being rejected for something I didn't even know that I'd done. I did plenty that I know I'd done. And when it finally dawned on me, when it finally came through from verses like this, Bob, I love you because of who I am, not because of who you are. I love you because of what my son has done, not because of what you do or don't do. It was like a tremendous weight, a tremendous fear, a tremendous burden was lifted, and suddenly now I'm worshiping and serving God out of a sense of want to instead of a sense of have to. Suddenly all the rules, and I still bind my life severely by other people's expectations. I even bind my life in ways that I know are not biblical, so no one will turn off the gospel that I preach. But now I do it out of love, as a gift to God, instead of as a ladder to Him. It's changed everything. You know, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, in chapter 5, the 10 Commandments, that God visits the iniquity of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generations. You know that verse? 3rd and 4th generations, the iniquity of the parents moved down. But if you'll look at Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9, it says that the love of God moves to the 1000th generation. Do you mean we can compare the character of God, that judgment is 3 or 4, but love is 1,000? Now you're beginning to see what God is really like. He really is like a heavenly Father. Why do you think Jesus called Him Abba, which is Aramaic for daddy or papa? It's the intimacy of the Jewish home. It's the love between a father and the child, the way it should be, that becomes the analogy to understand God. As a child, I used to have to, and I'm sure if those of you who come from divorced homes would remember this, I had to go once a week, once a summer, for a week to be with my dad. Now, I didn't know my dad well, and it was a difficult time for me, you know. I had no friends up there, nothing. And I can remember going up there, and my dad used to love to wear these V-neck T-shirts, and all this hair kind of went whoomp. I don't know what happened to me. I've tried Miracle Grow and don't have any, but and I used to love to sit in his lap and just make curls out of that. I'm sure it hurt, but he would let me, you know. When I am lonely and hurting and confused and don't know what to do, in my mind, God lets me crawl up in His lap and play with the hairs on His chest. It's no longer, Bob, what are you doing here? What do you want? Why are you here? Now I know that when I go to God in prayer, I go before the very throne room of God, and it's not, what are you doing here? It's, Bob, I'm so glad to see you. Come, get up in my lap. Tell me what's happening with you. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you dreaming? Bob, come here and talk to me. Changed my life. God wants to talk to me. He's forgiven me. He loves